All right, we're back on the record on State versus Loyd. Mr. Loyd's present with his attorney. State Attorney's Office is present. I think Mr. Buxman is here. Okay. All right. Everybody ready? Let's bring the jury back in. Gene, do I need to switch or I need to switch to the afternoon? Okay, thanks. No worries. Just want to make sure.
It's in here? Oh, you need it first. Okay. Okay. You can just call me over if you want. Just plug this in
Okay.
to the back here, but just motion.
Okay. Gotcha.
State recognize the presence of the jury.
We do, Your Honor.
Defense?
Yes.
All right, welcome back, folks. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. All right, it is the defense's turn for their closing. Mr. Lenamon, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon. There's a lot I'm going to talk about in the next couple of hours. And I want to tell you that writing this stuff down is important. Because a lot of what came from this table is not supported in evidence. It's not true. Can't be relied on. And I'm going to show you how you can figure that out yourselves. In short, they took 3 posts from Facebook, one from 2014, one from January of 2016, I think the other was from July, out of the 30,000 pages or so. And they created this fabricated story, and it makes absolutely no sense. And it's going to even make less sense when I show you what this was about and how it happened, and how you don't even have to rely on me to do it. You can rely on yourself. Now, what's important to know is as jurors, you are going to be provided a laptop. And with that laptop, you can take this, which I introduced. Remember, the state only introduced a little thing that they put together. They didn't introduce everything, because they don't want you to see everything. So he didn't talk about it. This has all the videos on it, and I'm going to point out the ones that are important. And when I say I'm pointing out the ones that are important, I wrote on the board, and I'd like you to write this down, what I'm going to be showing you. I have 6 points. The first point is Lieutenant Clayton firing position. The second point is Markeith Loyd running pattern. The third point is Markeith Loyd pulling gun out. The fourth point is Lieutenant Clayton firing into the ground, the concrete ground. The fifth point is Lieutenant Clayton shooting on her back. When she was shot and why. Because remember, there's 4 wounds. The most important wound that we're talking about is the neck. And I'm going to show you where I believe this happened, and I believe is supported by the video itself. And the 6th point is, it is super important that you understand the area where this happens, and how small it was, and how quick things went. They want to hype up on premeditation. When you look at the video, you're going to know there's no premeditation there. I believe you're going to believe that it's self-defense. Now, I'm going to talk to you about insanity later, but right now I want you to focus on this video. And when you get back there, designate someone who works the video better than me. And each one of you need to see and make a decision on these points. You may not agree with me. You may agree with part of it, but you need to look at those. Now, essentially what we're talking about here is that this is the area where the store doors are. And this is the area where she runs out, or she runs up to and fires from here. And then she starts to run across here to where she ends up laying down after she's been shot already in the abdomen. I think somebody testified, maybe the medical examiner testified, that it caused her to go down in the hip area. And you'll see in the video that the cart comes out and how the cart is still rolling when all this is going on. And what that is going to show is that this happened in a matter of seconds. Now, Detective Cadiz told you he believed the shooting itself was 6 seconds. And in my opening, I told you some things that are important. The radio transmissions are important. And I believe this is what the radio transmissions show. When she is walking up and saying, Markeith, whoever she refers to, is coming out the store now, and then whoever is on the line with her trying to talk to her doesn't hear anything, from the time that she says he's coming out of the store now and ends his radio transmission, there's about a 7-second delay. And I believe in that 7 seconds, that's when the cart is pushed, she runs, and she fires the shot. Now, he hasn't fired yet. When she fires the shot, she realizes that she didn't hit him. And she sees him coming around now with his gun. And so she starts to take off. And that's where you hear the 3 shots, bang, bang, bang. And those are Mr. Loyd's shots. And throughout this portion, remember, the first thing that you see, and I'm going to show you, is that her holding her hand extended. Now remember, these are 5 frames per second. My expert told you that TV is like 40, 50, 60 frames per second. So you're not going to see everything. So you have to really look closely at what's going on. And at some point, you're going to have to make a decision on your own individually whether what I say is correct and whether you believe it. And I will show you how I think I can prove that to you in a minute. She never drops her gun. She's running, she fires a shot, he starts coming towards her, she's running away, and at some point she fires into the ground, which you can see hit the cement in the middle of the driveway. She never drops her gun. She falls, but she turns over and she's continuing to fire her gun. Now they want to talk about execution. This is not even close to execution. 6 seconds. Being fired upon, defending yourself, trying to save your life while somebody is trying to kill you. Lieutenant Clayton is a trained police officer. And I'm not here to judge her or what she did. You guys have to make the decision what you think is important. I'm not here to say that when she held up her gun and fired, that was unreasonable. Maybe she thought he was facing her. But you can clearly see that his back is to her. And in the state of Florida, a police officer is not allowed to kill someone in a chase, even if they have a warrant, by shooting them in the back. And that's exactly what happened.
Objection.
Sustained. Rephrase.
All right, I'm going to go through. Ted, could you move this part here? Thank you. I'm going to leave this up here so when we go through the video, yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Nice. This is in the Walmart original file. And we're going down to the rooftop cam GM to N2. Now there's only 2 of these videos where you actually get to see the interaction as it occurs. There is other videos on here that you can see if you look at when she's walking across and she's holding her gun, and when he's walking out and him breaking away. You can see all those, but I think these are the most important 2 that I'm going to direct you in. As I said, I am not a professional, but you can do this, and we'll be doing it in the back. And you may have someone who can control a computer better than I can. But I'm going to try to stop and show you points that I think are important. The time is around 7:18. That's Miss Bryant walking away. Okay, this is her running up. You can see that blue pole that I was talking about. You can see the columns. 1, 2, 3. This. He runs out this way. He did not remember when he put it down with the green pen, but he runs out this way, and then he changes directions and runs. He goes on a wide angle, and then he comes back around, and I will show you where I believe he pulls his gun, and then we'll talk about more. Okay, so this is when she has already, what I believe, fired a shot. I'm going to show you, in this particular case, something easy for you to look at, but what I'm suggesting is that you should go and get to the exact point where she is pointing her hand. And this is the one that we have taken. This is when he has not fully come around yet, but he knows he's being shot at. This is her arm extended. Right there. That's when she fires a shot. So you need to come up to the location when she fires a shot and you will see the arm extended. Remember, we're talking 5 frames per second, which is much lower. So you're going to have to work that through. But this is an actual still photo of where she is in that position. Okay. Now I want you to focus on Mr. Loyd. He has come past that pillar, and he is headed now in the direction, the opposite direction away from the street and the location where she is at. Here, he has pulled his gun. She has already fired, and she starts to move away. Now watch, at this point, he has not pulled his gun yet. He is in the opposite direction of her. This is when she fires. This is what I was trying to pull up before. You see her right arm extended. And he's already been shot at, and he's starting now to go in her direction, because as he testified, he fears for himself. And this is reasonable person fear. This is not insanity. We'll talk about insanity later. Let me try that again. I'm going to try to stop it right before he makes that circular pattern where you can see at the pillar, if you look through, that he has not pulled his gun. Okay, now, look where his hand is. This is when he's reaching for his gun. She has already fired and she's starting to move away. Pulls his gun and continues the gun battle. Now, what I ask you to do is you have as much time as you want. I want you to look at my hypothesis that, like Dr. Gamache says, my hypothesis of what I see is happening and whether you believe that to be correct. This is up to you. You have a laptop, you will have this flash drive, you will have as much time as you need to go through it. So that would have been the point of him running and turning and then pulling his gun. Okay? Now, she's running away. She's already fired at him. Now he's giving chase to her because she's still a threat. You can see she has her gun in her hand still. She hasn't dropped her gun. As a matter of fact, in a second, she's going to shoot down into the concrete. Right there. See that smoke? That's the concrete she shoots down at. So he's hearing gunshots. This is all happening in a matter of seconds. Now this is the other camera from the rooftop where we're going to actually see what takes place in this area here where the shooting continues. You're always moving up to 717 in that area. Once you go through this, you'll easily see where you need to go and look at. Now, the first thing I want you to note is the cart, as I told you. There's the cart. So this cart was pushed from the other side of the wall, not where the columns were, but from the other side, as you heard testimony and you saw yourself, him going out that door, and the cart gets pushed, and now you're seeing where the cart is rolling from. This would suggest that you can kind of estimate what the area is. You know where the end of the concrete is and when the pillar and the open area begins, and you know where he was coming out the front door. So the reason this is important is it signifies clearly that this is happening in very short time. Okay, so now she has fallen, and she's on her back. She still has her gun, and her legs are up. Now, you just saw her raise her gun. He has his gun. She has her gun. Now, this is what I want you to watch for. You heard testimony from Mr. Robinson about her vest, where her vest is, and where the wounds are. The one wound that we're going to be talking about here is the wound that's right above, and the doctor says that that's probably the fatal, he does say it's the fatal wound. And that there was one other wound that could be fatal, but it would take longer. So now she's on the ground, and what I want you to watch is at some point her body is turned, and her gun is up, and Mr. Loyd is in front of her, and I would suggest that that is the shot that he makes. And I'll tell you why I suggest it. Because as soon as he does that, even though he goes around the body, as soon as he does that, you will see her arms relax. So the shot was not overhead execution, as the prosecutor has said, which absolutely is incorrect, even according to their own witnesses. You heard the testimony that when someone is shot with a firearm, I think it was Mr. Ruth who said that one of the things you look for in close-range wounds is soot. That's the gunfire stuff we see when we watch TV and we see slow motion, a gun is fired and all this stuff comes out. That's an indication that the gun is closer than 3 feet. If it's more than 3 feet, there's not going to be any soot. You heard from Ruth, you heard from Robinson. There was no soot in these wounds. In that wound either, the neck wound. So I suggest that when he is running around, if you look at the measurement of where his hand is, because he hasn't put his hand down, he tells you that he stops firing when she stops firing. She has stopped firing, but he's still checking. So when you see the gun around and down, there are no shots fired. And we know that because that gun was less than 3 feet away when that happened. The other issue, which is important to remember, is that shot that he fired and killed her was in response to her holding her gun up, and we know for a fact, based on the number of projectiles that were recovered, around her body. And if you look at, this is the kind of legend, and it says you're looking for 9mm Luger. And so we have D, E, G, H, I, and B and C are over here. So all her shots that were fired over here was in the seconds that occurred between the time that Mr. Loyd turned around after believing that he was going to be shot and the end moment when he shoots while her hands are still up, her arm is still up, and her leg is up. And let me show you that. Again, I am delegating, obviously, the responsibility on the conclusions that are made here, because what I say is argument, what Mr. Williams says is argument, for you to look yourself and see if what I'm saying is correct. Okay, he's already fired the shot. She had her leg up, and I'm going to go back See if I can catch that. You'll see after that shot that her arms relax. Still didn't catch it. Arms extended. His arm is extended. She's firing. She has to be firing. There are 8 casings that expel from her gun. Now, as he goes around, watch her arms go down. She's done. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. She's no longer firing. He's no longer firing. And as I said, this is something that only you can decide if what I'm saying is correct. And what is the point, what I'm saying? The point here is that if he's fired upon first, and he believes that his life is at danger, and he has a firearm, and he's going to defend himself, then the minute that he turns around and sees her with a gun, he's not going to stop firing until she doesn't have a gun or he's not in danger anymore. To think otherwise is not plausible. To think that you can just stop in midair while she still has the gun, because she fires down on the concrete. To think that you can just stop like the state is suggesting, which makes absolutely no sense. And they're suggesting without showing you this. And they never wanted to show you this because they have problems with this. Because what it shows is exactly what I'm saying. You make the decision for yourself, of course. But once that gunfight is on, once the first shot is fired, and now he's reacting, and she still has her gun in her hand, and she's still firing, in a matter of seconds, what does the state want to happen? For him to stop and run away while she has a gun pointed at him? After she had fired at least twice, first time at the front, the second time on the concrete, and then we know a bunch of times when she falls down, they're still firing at each other. He could not stop in his tracks. He could not walk away. Yes. Have a moment, Judge.
Yes, sir.
Judge, can I have a moment to look through the state's evidence?
You can.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. You're right. I'm showing you what's been marked as 2L or 21, exhibit for the state. This is the angle that we're talking about. Her body is flipped this way, and he's standing over there. And if you see At that time, she has her gun up, and she's shooting, and he's shooting down at her. If you look at the placement of her body and the placement of his, this is absolutely consistent. Now, if you remember, Mr. Loyd said, and I think it was only on the last shot, that he was shooting at the vest. And I had to put the evidence in that showed the actual vest in her shirt, location of the bullet holes. The important one was the shot to her neck, which, as you heard, ended up just being above where the vest is. So I ask you, there are a lot of other videos on that. There obviously, the section that is marked Loyd Walmart Originals, those are all the lengthy, long, from 6:30 to 7:30 or whatever. You can move ahead. You can look for when her car pulls up, which is sometime around 7, when Mr. Loyd was already in the store. We know that because of the camera that is at the front of the door. It shows him coming at 6:44, shows her coming at 7. The state argued in their opening statement that he had to know her car was out there. They're just throwing things together for us. They don't care about the accuracy of this. They want to inflame your passion that you have this beautiful police officer who is very meaningful to the community and, of course, her family, and dies in this tragic incident. They're hoping that you're going to set aside the logic of the events that occurred and just make it. And they tried to do that through this really measly approach of using
Sustained.
this
Mr. Lund.
really misrepresentative approach of saying he had these 3 posts, therefore that was his motivation to kill her. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous argument. That argument is only directed to inflame your passions, to forget about justice, and to think about retribution against Markeith Loyd. You can't rely on, in my opinion, very much of what they say. Mr. Williams did this whole closing argument about how Markeith was looking to kill a police officer, based on these posts that were, one was two years old. The newest one was 7 months. And you heard Dr. Toomer explain those in the context of the bigger thing. And you heard that Markeith say that all those posts were written at a time when the police were killing young men, young black men. And you knew about his passion and his beliefs, whether they don't rise to all of our levels because they're fixed false beliefs, but you know about and heard about that. Yet they're trying to distort this because they don't have the evidence necessary to convict Mr. Loyd of first-degree premeditated murder. Now, there's going to be other charges that you're going to hear about. Heat of passion. If you find heat of passion on a first-degree murder charge, you can't convict a first-degree murder. And it will explain that to you. There's going to be lessers of second-degree murder, which talk about different state of mind. And you are more than welcome, obviously, to look at all of those and see what applies. The only one who can go to a penalty if you convict them of anything but first-degree murder charge, case is over. Ted, can you grab this one? Thanks. So who is Markeith Loyd and where do we begin? We begin in 2014, July. Mr. Loyd gets out of prison then after serving a lengthy sentence for drugs. He admitted that he was selling drugs at a young age, which isn't unusual, especially in lower economic areas. People don't have money, they can't eat. He knew there was a time when his family didn't have food and he had to steal. And so that's where we begin. And Markeith gets out in July of 2014, and he wants to make a clean break. He wants to start over. And we have absolute evidence that from July of 2014 up to the time when Ms. Dixon was shot, that he is doing things to change his life. He is working hard on multiple jobs. At some point he had 4 jobs. He's making decent money, so much decent money that in his logic, even though he's a convicted felon, that he doesn't want to give up that job even though he was robbed twice a gun. So he goes and gets guns and starts carrying. And it may not be the logic that I or you have, but Markeith is doing good. He's got his own house. People are living with him. There's multiple relationships. And so during this period, though, he learns how to post on Facebook. And you can be sure that many of the posts that were in Facebook, just like the one that we read that Dr. Toomer talked about, that he was on the exterior that way too. He didn't trust white people. He didn't trust police officers. He was attached to a system that from a very young age created or fostered this belief. And I suggest, when I say fostered this belief, that it started at a very young age. And if he was never having a mental illness, he would have never been to the extreme that he is. But because he had a mental illness, his beliefs went this way. They were irrational, they were false, fixed beliefs, delusional. Yet he continued to live a life where he is working and doing what he wants in terms of living his life. And then we have this event that happens in December of 2016 involving Ms. Dixon. And Dr. Toomer talks about these posts that he had and why they are related to this fixed false belief. And so as we lead up to this incident that occurred with Ms. Dixon, which, as you know, you can't consider, we know that Markeith Loyd is never getting out of prison, ever. You know that
Objection.
from the very beginning.
Sustained.
The judge told you. Life without the possibility of parole.
Objection.
Sustained. Move on, Mr. Lenamon.
So you can't consider that. But what you can consider is, we know that there is somebody who has these fixed false beliefs going into a situation in December 13th, 2013, where an event occurs, and you heard 2 sides of it. You heard Mr. Loyd's side, you heard Ron Stewart's side. We're not here to litigate that issue. That stuff was being offered for Markeith's state of mind at the time, and what happens when he leaves there, which he finds out shortly after leaving there, that the press is lying about what had happened at the Dixons. And he becomes fixated with it. As he has become fixated with many things in his life. This was another one. And this is after he killed his 2-month-old child, in which he told you that he was attacked, and he started cheating. And these are the stressors that he's feeling. And so he starts to get his niece to reach out to both the press and the police with the enticement of, get the press, tell the truth, and I will turn myself in. And that doesn't happen. Because the press tells, or the police tell them that we can't control what they write. And his niece goes in and tries to do it for her, and some unfavorable things happen, rejected, they take a story and make it different than it was really. So now we have this super added stressor with the stressors he's feeling already in his life. And as Dr. Tumor told you, that Markeith had believed the police were trying to kill him for some time. But I suggest, unlike what the state is alleging, that the only time that Markeith would react directly is when the police officer is actually trying. Because we know in Carter's case, Captain Carter, that he shot at the wheel, which is on the other side of the vehicle. And he shot once, unlike what Carter said, twice, because we didn't have any casings or projectiles that were matched to his gun, other than the one casing and the one projectile. And so thus begins, in a heightened state of mind where he is believing the police are going to kill him. And we start to see what unfolds as this, this supportive reaction to this delusional thinking. I mean, many of us in this courtroom have religions, we have beliefs, we have faiths. And many of us may have a belief or faith that allows us to praise God, talk to God. But he believed that God was talking back. We believe that by signs. He was giving signs that God was talking back to him. And so he leaves Dixon. This event is unresolved, involving the police helping get to the truth. And we know, based on what Ronald Stewart said, we know part of the truth was Sade had a gun. And we know it's not in the car. And so now he has all these unresolved issues that are creating a heightened state of delusional thinking. And he goes out and he begins to live in the woods in Orlando. After committing this crime, he's living in the woods. He's staying in some trap houses the drug users stay. He referenced them as homeless people also, that they wouldn't ever say anything about him or know about him being involved in the Dixon shooting. And the delusions continue. because he has this belief that he's going to be killed by the police. So one day, his story is, he goes out to get some food or get whatever, and he runs into this guy who has a vest, a bulletproof vest. And he, right away, he believes this is a sign from God. As he has said throughout this whole entire episode, leading up to his arrest, sign of God, sign of God, sign of God. And I suggest that that's part of the conjecture. So he gets his vest, and he pays $200. He has $200 because he was making $1,000 a week at the chicken place. He was working at the chicken place when he went to see Ms. Dixon. So he has money on him still. But he can't go anywhere to buy anything because he's concerned that he's going to be seen and put himself at risk to be killed. So he tells you he loses about 40 pounds from December 13th to January 9th. Lieutenant Clayton was killed. And after he gets this bulletproof vest, he wants to test it. Because he's seen on TV how you can shoot to the vest and it'll knock you out. He wants to test to see if it's working. That's not very logical. I can't say that it's related to mental illness, but I would guess. And the guy stops him and says, "You can't do that. You can't test it." He doesn't test it, but he begins to wear it. Now, Mr. Williams got up there in his closing argument and talked about how this was part of the master plan of Markeith Loyd. He gets his vest because he wants to kill cops. There's not 1 ounce of evidence. When you listen to Mr. Williams, first of all, when you think back to what Mr. Williams said, ask yourself, what evidence supports what he said? Does it make sense? Or is he just making something up? Try to take us down this road of emotion and anger and hate and convict Markeith Loyd. I would suggest that's it. Because for someone to come up with a desperate story like that,
Your Honor, when we approach
Sustained. Let me see the attorneys at the bench, please. Mr. Lenamon, can you check your mic, please? Make sure it's on.
yes.
You may?
Yes, it's on, Judge.
All right. Yes. I wasn't going to start without her. All right. You may proceed.
Thank you. So while he is living in the woods, he decides that he wants to go to Walmart. And he happened to be driving by. And he told you the reason why he wanted to go by Walmart. I mean, I think it's an original reason. What he said was that he had to use the restroom. And he also told you that he wanted to try to get some food and supplies. because he hadn't been able to eat. And so he pulls his car up, and this is 644, and he drives, parks in the parking lot, and you see where he had parked, and he goes in to Walmart wearing a security vest that has security on the front, and he's wearing a beanie, and he has his bulletproof vest underneath him, and obviously he has one gun on him, and had left one gun in the vehicle. And he goes in, and he walks around and does shopping. He uses the bathroom, and at some point he sees Lieutenant Clayton, and he avoids her. And then he goes and checks out with his items, and as he's checking out, Miss Bryant actually came to the line that he was at and kind of went in front of him, and she ended up at some point recognizing him. And as soon as she was done, she walked out and spoke with Lieutenant Clayton. Meanwhile, Mr. Loyd doesn't know anything is happening at this point. He's pushing his cart. He goes, you see him go through the front door. We have video that shows Lieutenant Clayton walking away from her car through the glass. All you can see is that she has her hand on her gun, and she's using the radio. I think Detective Cadiz talked about that as well. And so she goes and starts walking to the front entrance. And meanwhile, there are some radio transmissions that become important that we get to hear, with her at some point saying, first she says the initial that Markeith Loyd. Someone told me he's involved in a murder. And as you listen to her, you can clearly tell she has never heard of Markeith Loyd. She does not know who Markeith Loyd is. But she's been told by a member of the community that Markeith Loyd has this warrant for murder. There's no question about that. So she gets on the line, and she goes to an emergency channel, and she begins to walk over there. And her next transmission is, they're asking, I think it was Sarge, what are you doing? What are you doing? And she's saying, I'm just walking up. He's coming out the door now. And then that's the break. And that's the 7 seconds that I'm talking to you about, from the break all the way up to the shots. And you don't hear her shot on the radio, because she doesn't get on the radio until she had fired her shot, and she says that she's in pursuit. So she says she's in pursuit, and then you hear bang, bang, bang. And so what had happened during that incident at Walmart is that as Mr. Markeith Loyd is pushing out the car, he sees a gun that's pointing towards him. He says he wasn't absolutely sure until maybe retrospectively that it was a police officer, but he may have thought it was a police officer. It really doesn't matter, because he turns to leave and he runs. He's running away from her. He doesn't confront her. He doesn't take her on. He runs away from her. And his goal is to go to the woods. He tells you that. So as he runs away from her, she is trailing him in the front. So when he brakes, and you can't see this, so I imagine, based on where she ends up, she brakes and starts to run. And Mr. Loyd gets to a point where he is going to the woods. And I can play it for you. It's on that video. I don't want to kind of waste the time, but there are 2 videos of drone shots involving the Walmart store. And you can see there are clearly woods across the street from the front of the Walmart. And that's where he was going. So he's headed there, and as he starts to run, he sees her. He sees her out of the corner of his eye, and he changes direction. He begins to run away from her again. It's a little wider when he turns, because this is what happens. He turns, she shoots, and thus the gun battle happens. That's exactly what happens on the film, on the video. And you saw the video. You have plenty of time to look at the video, evaluate the video. I'm not going to get any, I've already talked to you about what I think had happened, and I've covered that. So Markeith Loyd leaves and gets in his car. And he is clearly, he knows he's killed an officer. I mean, she's in full uniform. And so he's now trying to get away. Now, in terms of getting away, there's no question he's a convicted felon. You can put check mark by that. He's guilty of carrying a firearm and being a convicted felon. But what happens then is he drives away, and at some point he sees Mr. Carter, Captain Carter, turn around and put his lights on. He's in an unmarked car, but it's clear that he's a police officer, too. And Markeith turns into this apartment complex. When he turns into the apartment complex, he drives up and at some point stops, and he sees or notes that Carter is behind him. Captain Carter's behind him. So he gets out and he fires a shot at the wheel. Not at Captain Carter, not 2 shots, fires a shot at the wheel. Now you will see with every charge that exists, there are lesser included, as Mr. Williams told you. Lesser included offenses. So the most serious offense here is attempted murder, first-degree murder of a police officer. I suggest that he's not guilty of that because there's no premeditation. He's shooting at his tire. He's not shooting to kill him. And this is important. The premeditation instruction and understanding the premeditation instruction is super important because it's the state's requirement that they prove premeditation on the crimes that include premeditation. If they don't prove it, you cannot convict Mr. Loyd of any of the crimes, which is the crime involving Captain Carter and the crime involving Lieutenant Clayton. If you don't believe that they proved premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt on those charges, you cannot convict them. Now, you can convict them of lesser charges. The lesser charges are second-degree murder, manslaughter, attempted second-degree murder, attempted manslaughter. Those are all crimes. But they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that premeditation was shown. And so he flees from Captain Carter, and at some point he discards his clothes. That may have been after he met with Mr. Thomas. And Mr. Thomas said that Markeith pointed a gun at him. Mr. Thomas could have believed that Markeith pointed a gun at him. Markeith says he held the gun up, showing him. When you look at a charge like robbery, it really doesn't matter. You don't have to point a gun. Because someone's showing you, hey, give me your keys. Give me your keys. That's still robbery. So you have to decide what you believe and what applies to that particular charge. The carjacking, there's lessers. That's something you need to look at yourself. Now, going back to the Walmart, there were 3 women that came in and testified that they were witnesses at the Walmart. Ms. Bryant, Ms. Johnson, and Ms. Pridgeon. Let's start with Ms. Pridgeon. Ms. Pridgeon claims to have seen a lot. Hold on. I was reminded that in Mr. Thomas's case, he came in here and admitted that when Mr. Loyd first approached him, he said something to Mr. Loyd like, "Are you serious?" And I think that that's evidence that you can look at in regards to whether the gun was actually pointed. And if the gun was actually pointed, someone would say, "Are you serious?" And, you know, I don't think so. If I can have a moment, Judge.
Yes.
And also, if you remember, I tried to refresh his recollection about that statement. Are you serious? I gave you a statement. He said it wasn't in there, but he said it. That's something you can consider. All right, now I want to talk about, and then of course you see he leaves the area, he runs through a fence, then he ends up leaving the car at an apartment, and he ends up telling you that he took a bus, 3 buses I think he said, and then he ends up in front of Volusia, in Volusia County. So now I want to talk a little bit about the investigation that occurred at the Walmart. As you recall, Detective Cadiz was the lead detective in that case. And the issue that you really need to decide in terms of Detective Cadiz, the Orlando Police Department, the way the investigation was conducted, is whether there was a conflict of interest that existed at the time, whether that interfered with their ability to do what was important in the investigation. And I suggest there's evidence that it did. Detective Cadiz tells you that without question he had conversations with Mr. Loyd. And then he used some pretty heavy language and comments about Mr. Loyd, including Mr. Loyd not living. And when I cross-examined him on that issue, he admitted those, and he said he had a relationship. I don't think he said he had a personal relationship, he had a professional relationship with Lieutenant Clayton. And so we get to the investigation now. So this incident has just happened, 7 o'clock in the morning. Living Good, CSI, Living Good comes out. She's the main person who's doing the collection of evidence and actually taking photographs. And one of the things she does is she, did you give me the, one of the things she does is she photographs and documents where items are discovered. And the state has these smaller versions and evidence as well. And what we see here is the area where Mr. Loyd was, the area where Detective Clayton came out of the land. And then we have the casings, which are important, because the casings show where the proximity of the bullets being fired. Now, we know that there is one casing missing, unless you believe that Lieutenant Clayton didn't do what other trained officers did and put 16, one in the chamber, 15 in the cartridge. Lieutenant Clayton was significantly experienced. I don't think she would have done that. So the importance of the set of these casings is it shows where the casings landed after a shot was fired. So essentially you have up here, this is R, and this is Mr. Loyd's gun. A is Mr. Loyd's gun. All of these except K, well, K is also the gun that's belonging to Lieutenant Clayton. All of these belong. Q is, must be a different piece of evidence that the state can put on here. But all these other ones are casings required. Why is that important? Because we have a gun battle going on. This shows, imagine 8 shots, you hear 8 shots. At the same time your gun is going off. That's probably pretty loud. Imagine having the gun pointed at you while this is happening.
Objection.
Sustain.
And so these become important because it shows the different locations. And what we know is, generally speaking, when a firearm, according to Mr. Robinson, who is significantly experienced, when a firearm is fired, the casing ejects to the right, and he said about a 45-degree angle. Now, Cadiz wouldn't say that. Cadiz talked about going to the firearm range, not having 16 gun. Can't tell where cases go. Doesn't make sense. There's so many variables. And I suggested they're saying that belief. But we know that there is one casing missing, and we have K over here. What I would suggest is that K comes from when she is running across here, and she's firing at Mr. Loyd behind her. That's where you see K. Because remember, it goes right out and right into whatever.
Mr. Lenamon, one of the jurors is having trouble seeing you're standing in front of the exhibit. Yeah. Thank you. Can everyone see the exhibit? All right, go ahead, Mr. Len.
So where is the casing in the shot that she fired at Mr. Loyd initially? Now, Mr. Robinson put together a chart. I'm sure you remember it, because he wrote on it, I think, with green marker. So I'm going to ask you to rely on your memory, because apparently I'm going to try to get that from Mr. Robinson.
Objection. Facts not in
Sustained.
evidence.
We don't have
I'm
it.
sorry.
Facts not in evidence as to Mr. Robinson.
Sustained.
We don't have that drawn in here. But I would suggest what he says is that she's firing from up here, which is she's firing from right here. If you look at the video, you can count these, you can see those. And so that is approximately, I guess, here. We know that we have the data source. But wherever she's firing from, you heard Mr. Robinson said that it would eject, and he showed you kind of an angle. Like the first one I asked him if she was pointing, I don't remember if it was an angle, the first one, or whether it was straight, but I asked him to do two, and he drew a line where they were going. I just remind them. But I would suggest that one of these cases is from that fired shot. The only other explanation is a missing case that was not recovered. But I would suggest this shows this is where that case would have ended up. And so it's important to know that when you look at the evidence and the consistency of the evidence, it's important to keep in mind all the things that are being argued and said. Whatever argument I make, whatever argument Mr. Williams makes, you need to look at the evidence and see if it supports what we're saying. Now, the next thing we deal with is a situation where at some point in the investigation, they recover a projectile, and it's collected by Detective Overton. Now, why is that important? There was a conflict that went back and forth, remember, between what CSI Livergood said and Detective Overton about him calling her to come out. She said she never got any call to come out. And then both Overfield And Detective Cadiz coming in here and saying that, oh, you know, it looked old and it wasn't really important, that's ridiculous. In a homicide investigation, where you know killing of a police officer, they're going to seek death, for them to become sloppy about a piece of evidence because they thought it was brains. And you heard Mr. Robinson say that, you know, the abrasion comes from hitting off things, and you saw yourself what we put into evidence. And Q13, which is this one, is that projectile, and we put this into evidence, and none of them look any different than the other. So whether it was being sloppy, not caring, not being concerned, feeling that the investigation is wrapped up, they have Markeith Loyd, you know who he is, they're going to get him. I don't know why that happened. But what we do know is both their firearms examiner and mine both agree that there are consistencies with the type of ammunition that she was using in Winchester. And the Q13 and the Q4, which is the Sade, 9mm, which was Sade Dixon, there are consistencies. And so that consistency would certainly support what we have said from the very beginning, is that she fired and it ricocheted and they found partial bullet. Now, can you say that definitively? Absolutely not. There's no question about that. But it's important evidence because there is consistency. It wasn't fired by the 40. It wasn't fired by the 40, and certainly they said there could be other guns. But what is the likelihood of a projectile being found at Walmart that has consistency with the Sade after shooting it happened? That it would be another gun. Maybe there's some, but I would suggest it's important evidence to support what we're saying. And the other thing Detective Cadiz does is that as soon as they figure out that there's a Walmart video, he goes and directs, I think it's Mr. Williams, is the person who works for them, video person who works for them, and collects the Walmart video. He directs them to create 15 stills. And he admits that the first still that he created was when Mr. Loyd already had his gun out, and was pointed and chased against Lieutenant Clayton. And I say that's usually important because it shows the conflict. And whether it was a concern that perhaps Lieutenant Clayton did fire, and they didn't want to put her on that spot, or that they wanted to stay away from any evidence of her possible firing. I don't know what their motivation was. But what is clear is there appears to be a conflict that exists between Detective Cadiz and your medical police department in regards to this investigation. Now I want to talk about Dr. Toomer. Because Dr. Toomer is the only doctor that came in here. And shared with you a significant amount of his communication with Mr. Loyd. And I'll talk about the other two doctors in a little bit. Dr. Toomer is an African-American doctor. He told you straight out why he doesn't believe in the death penalty. And he told you what he reviewed and all the work he did. And Dr. Toomer made it apparent that in dealing with the investigation of someone's state of mind, mental health issues, is that you have to look to the totality of circumstances. You just can't pick out a book like it appears their experts did on the DSM-5, which Dr. Toomer told you is not the all of evaluations, and do a little checklist like their doctors did. Dr. Toomer told you that he looked at the Facebook pages and he told you about what he saw. Disjointed, delusional thinking, false fixed beliefs. He told you why about the KKK and all the issues related to that. Mr. Loyd's firm belief that the white man was trying to kill him. And that's important here because what we're exploring is not only the moment in time when Mr. Loyd is involved with Lieutenant Clayton in a shootout, but we're talking about the time leading to it and the time after it. And Dr. Toomer told you that Mr. Loyd had been fixated for some time on the police trying to kill him. And he also had been fixated for some time about the injustices of racism. How when Mr. Loyd was a boy, he began to explore the issue by seeing and being exposed to Roots and other shows, which includes Mississippi Burning. And so what we see here through the testimony of Dr. Clayton, that through a lifetime of trauma and exposure to this issue involving racism, that at some point mental illness becomes a part of Mr. Loyd. Now, does one go with the other? No. There are people who do things and say things and may sound crazy, but in the end, they're not mentally ill. But in this case, we had Dr. Toomer explain to you the symptomology of the mental illness: schizophrenia, bipolar, manic depression, delusional thinking, PTSD. And he explained to you why he believed that those were relevant in existence with Mr. Loyd. And he came to the conclusion, after his evaluation and determination and study of Mr. Loyd and the events that transpired, that Mr. Loyd did fit into the two prongs of insanity. He was mentally ill, and though he knew right from wrong, let me double check because I want to make sure I got the right prong. Although he knew what he was doing and its consequences, he did not know it was wrong. That's the prong 2. Now, we have the burden in this particular case. Normally, the state has the burden of proving their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Here, we have the burden of proving clear and convincing evidence. And the clear and convincing evidence comes from Dr. Toomer and the events that has transpired throughout this trial, including Mr. Loyd, who does not believe he's mentally ill. Mr. Loyd told you he doesn't believe he's mentally ill. But we hired a doctor because we thought it was important or had the opinion otherwise, and he independently investigated circumstances surrounding the events leading up to Mr. Loyd's situation with Lieutenant Clayton and that, and he came to the firm conclusion that Mr. Loyd was insane at the time of this incident. Now, the issue here is there are many people who think that insanity is just defined by outward, crazy behavior. And if one would look into their life and to the circumstances they've experienced and the people they see, one would realize that there are internal factors many times that dominate an individual's psyche, their mind, and that you don't always see it. And I would suggest to you that maybe you did, maybe you didn't see something when you heard Mr. Loyd. But the issue is if you believe Dr. Toomer's testimony, then you have to find, and it's clear and convincing to you, you have to find Mr. Loyd not guilty by reason of insanity. So I didn't get to finish talking about Ms. Pritchett. Ms. Pritchett was out in the parking lot. She was in her car. She had her window rolled down. And she talked about what she had seen, what she hadn't seen. And I would suggest that she wasn't being completely frank because she completely left out that she had originally said in her statement that she heard them talking about a shoplifter. And at some point in my cross-examination, I said to her, would anything refresh her memory? And I was going to give her a statement. And she said, no. What does that mean to you? That means she has some kind of interest in her mind of giving testimony a certain way. I don't know why. But I would suggest that you evaluate her testimony. As far as Ms. Johnson is concerned, Ms. Johnson didn't actually see the event. She was inside the store, but she claims that she said she saw the gun pointed by Lieutenant Clayton. She saw that, and she said that she heard one shot first and then other shots, which is consistent with what happened. You heard from Dr. Mayer, and why is Mayer important? Mayer was asked about his opinion about Markeith Loyd's insanity, both at the time of the Dixon case and the time here. He said that during the Dixon case he wasn't insane, and we did not use insanity in that case. And he also said that he had not done a full evaluation to make the determination on this case. Now, I believe the reason they called Dr. Mayer in was because on cross-examination of Dr. Toomer, Dr. Mayer Mr. Williams had said, isn't it true that you looked at Dr. Mayer's evaluation and he found Mr. Loyd not guilty, or that he was not insane at the time of the offense? That's exactly what I believe happened, okay? And he said at first, he was like, I reviewed his report, maybe I know that. And then I got up on redirect and I said, doctor, were you given Mayer's stuff from the Dixon case? He said, yes. Were you given anything else other than the Dixon case from Dr. Mayer? And he said no, because he wasn't. So I think that's why they called Dr. Mayer in, but Dr. Mayer tells us something very telling. He tells us when you heard testimony about a test called the MMPI-2R. And that test is basically to determine many issues, including the issue of psychosis. And Markeith tested very high, you heard from Dr. Mayer, on the psychosis end. But he also tested that he was underreporting. And the importance of underreporting means is that he's making himself look less crazy than he really is. And what I suggest in that case, because I asked Dr. Mayer, do you ever have issues with African Americans trusting you? It says it happens all the time, has to build trust. Sometimes it takes a while. In this particular case, I think he only interviewed Mr. Loyd for 4 or 5 hours. But what I suggest here is the 3 other doctors that have testified at this trial are white. 2 of the state's doctors, Gamache and Werner, and Dr. Mayer. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about Gamache and Werner, but I would suggest to you that one of the things you need to consider is, is he being completely upfront and truthful about everything because he's trying to make himself look less crazy? That's what underreporting is. Let me talk about the state's witnesses. Dr. Gamache is very intelligent. By appearance, he appears to be the know-it-all witness of all times. He never, ever answers the question without giving his opinion about something else. He's always very focused to make himself look good and the state look good. And more importantly, he is someone that you can't really rely on because of who he is and what he is. This is a gentleman, and I know all of you have indicated that you believe in the death penalty, but this is a gentleman who has a business model where he does the defense and the state, and he's done a lot of both. I think he's done like 35, 40 death penalty cases for the state. This is a guy who has told you time and time again things that didn't end up being correct. And I'll give you one example. Facebook. It was painful for you guys to have to listen to 210 pages of questions about Facebook. But Dr. Gamache never thought that would happen. Dr. Gamache's evaluation was videotaped, as was Dr. Warner's. What that allows is a transcript to be created of everything that's talked about between the two of them. It's memorialized. And when you have a situation like that, you can't get away from what was said in the evaluation. And I would suggest to you, in this particular case, he had said, which was the predicate that brought out the Facebook. Oh yeah, I talked about numerous times about the Facebook. And I was like, really? Okay, let's go through this. And I went through 200 and something pages of the interview he had with Mr. Loyd. And Dr. Gamache, being the smooth operator that he is, was all of a sudden like, well, I don't mean I'm talking about using the worst Facebook, but I'm really talking about everything that is in his Facebook pages, which was ridiculous. This is a guy who has spent years and years and years working for law enforcement. He worked for the FDLE, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department, the Tampa Sheriff's Department. And why is that important? Because it's something you can consider in terms of his reliability and motivation. I mean, he clearly, and obviously we're all respectful of law enforcement and know how important they are to us. But if you have a witness who's coming in who has a predetermined decision about his relationship because he's pro-law enforcement and then testifying for the state, those are two kind of things that come together that don't seem very safe. And we heard from Dr. Warner. We didn't hear much details from Dr. Warner. I did question her a number of times about what she omitted or was inconsistent with her report and the evaluation she did. And I think one time she got offended. She was laughing, like I was picking at something. Like he had said he was actually 20 when this happened, and she had said 17 or 18. That all becomes important because they want to try to fix in that Mr. Loyd is not being truthful about something. And so they had an opportunity to have both transcripts of Mr. Loyd's interview where he talked about Dixon, where he talked about this event, to use as impeachment against Mr. Loyd. Well, Mr. Loyd, didn't you say this then? Didn't you say that then? And it failed miserably for them because Mr. Loyd never changed his story. Let's talk about Markeith Loyd. Judge, do you know how much time I have left?
You have about 15 minutes left.
15 minutes, thank you. You listen to Markeith Loyd. He did not have to testify. Every individual who's charged with a crime has the absolute right not to testify because he could be cross-examined, they could bring evidence against him, make omissions. Not once did he deny ever shooting and killing Lieutenant Clayton. But he told you the story, which is consistent with the evidence. He ran. He was trying to get away. She came closer. He turned directions. He heard a shot. He turned around. He had his gun. There was a gun battle. She was shooting at him. He was shooting at her. And he never stood over her and shot her. He stood back. When you look at the video, you can see when it happens. Watch her arms. It's important for you to evaluate every witness's testimony. And because you know in the back of your mind, Mr. Loyd was convicted of murder and doing a life sentence. We know the judge had you promise that you couldn't factor that in. And you shouldn't factor it in. But what you need to factor in is your evaluation of his testimony and what he said, and how it's consistent or inconsistent with the evidence. And I would suggest it's consistent. I would suggest not one time was Mr. Loyd impeached by the prosecution. And although he may be someone that we as a community have issues with, although he may be someone that we can't imagine ever understanding where he came from or what he has experienced, you still have to follow the laws of our state. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the jury instructions. I don't understand what this is. Okay. Okay. Gotcha. There is an instruction included in the first-degree murder instruction of Lieutenant Clayton as a law officer that talks about heat of passion. And a determination that if you believe Mr. Loyd did not act with a premeditated design to kill, but he acted in the heat of passion based on adequate provocation, then in order to find the defendant did not act with premeditated design to kill because he acted in the heat of passion based on adequate provocation, and then there's a checklist of 5 different things. And of course, this says, as the law, as I told you, if you have a reasonable doubt about whether the defendant acted with a premeditation designed to kill because he acted in the heat of passion based on adequate provocation, you should find him not guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated murder of a law enforcement officer. So that's included in the jury instructions on the first-degree murder count of Lieutenant Clayton. And if you find that, then you have to decide what you believe that he's guilty of. You may believe he's guilty of second-degree murder. You may feel he's guilty of manslaughter. Whatever you believe the highest charge that's been proven, that's the one you should check. There are a number of lessers to the main charge against Lieutenant Clayton. As I mentioned, there's the second-degree murder of a law enforcement officer. There's manslaughter, there's regular second degree. So there are a number of lessers on every charge, and I'm really interested in talking to you about the charge involving Lieutenant Clayton's death that you can fine for. You can look at and fine for. And as I told you before, unless there's a conviction for a premeditated first-degree murder, then we are going to be done. So whether you find him,
And
Sustained.
whether you find him guilty of second-degree murder or whatever, those are going to be your options. I'm almost done, folks. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about one Facebook post that the state introduced. This is one the state had provided to you. In that one, which is from 6/1/2016, if you look at the last sentence, I'd rather die than live my life in cell without a female, so I'm going to do right to stay right. Completely inconsistent with what the state says. Again, I remind you, it is extremely important to view these videos until you are comfortable that you have a firm belief in what is being depicted. And I would strongly suggest that you have this in front of you when you look at the video involving the shooting of Lieutenant Clayton. The one they said was cold-blooded killing, and the one I say was self-defense because she was shooting at him at that time, and where he was positioned and what her body was positioned in. In speaking to my client, he reminded me that there is no way possible to make the shot that they're talking about and be standing over her. After you hear all the evidence, folks, I'm confident that you will find Mr. Loyd not guilty as to the charge of first-degree premeditated murder of a law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lenamon. Ladies and gentlemen, do you need a break before the state's rebuttal? All right, why don't you take it's 3:10, why don't you guys take a 15-minute break? When you come back, it'll be the state's rebuttal. I'll finish the jury instructions, and we'll send you out to deliberate. Thank you.